No degree of imagination or disciplined power of rehearsal can prepare anyone for the unspeakable. And there can be nothing more unspeakable nor alas very probably more common than the violence inflicted on children, James Baldwin. Baldwin's statement could not be more applicable than it is to the Atlanta child murder cases, a series of losses that truly spiraled out of control. And although we were not prepared for preventing it, we were definitely ready to have a discussion of the lack of attention and sheer negligence that police personnel have exhibited with these cases. Throughout the many investigations covered in David Finner's Mindhunter, the film highlights the corruption in the protocols followed by the Atlanta Police Department, anywhere from leaving evidence at crime scenes to tampering with paperwork. We begin with the case of Earl Terrell, a young man who was last seen sitting outside of the South Bend Park pool after he was shouted at to leave the premises by lifeguard Olivia Hickson. He was last seen crying on a corner near Jonesboro, where he was buying pops at a grocery store just a block from his house. Mindhunter continues the synopsis with the FBI attempting to retrace the APD's efforts in Terrell's investigation, only to find that no real investigation occurred upon interviewing neighbors around the abduction site.
Anything else you told the officers before could be helpful.
Weren't no officers come here. Ain't nobody ask us nothing.
Thank you, ma'am. You've been very helpful.
Thank you. There's no car at the brick house.
Elsie's first. That's the third person we talked to within 1 block of where this kid disappeared, and not one of them was interviewed.
I'm starting to think there's a lot that's dropped through the cracks.
During this scene, Jim and Tench gain a potential lead when the elderly lady points out the areas where the kids like to play, the brick house and the yellow house. Yet they also come to realize that the APD neglected to interview the block where the abduction took place. This reshifts the attitudes of viewers back to looking at the APD in a negative light. That is then exacerbated by an image of a police officer in a black car within a gloomy, drizzling environment in an unkept lower middle class area. Through mise en scène, a strong visual appeal is made by the cinematographer. Through a shift in camera angle towards an ominous black car with an APD officer inside. Whereas the rain contributes to the gloomy environment, it also assists in producing a foggy and hazy windshield that reduces the viewer's visibility into the car. By not being able to see specific facial features, the viewer is left to generalize the dark figure as a stereotypical white cop, who symbolizes negligence towards the black community. This helps play onto society's current perception of cops, while also portraying the officer as a microcosm of the APD, a chief example of negligence. The very disregard of trying to figure out where to begin the search showcases the negligence of the APD in not performing the preliminary steps any law enforcement officer needs to take when conducting an investigation. This already contributes to society's poor perception of police officers, and reestablishes a sense of incompetence tied to local and city law enforcement. Although this scene in Mindhunter was not detailed in real police reports, we are made aware of the APD's negligence through the real case study which highlights that Terrell's body was missing some clothes, and some of the Atlanta investigators even accidentally left body parts, including teeth, at the scene.
Terrell's case is not the singular instance of the task force deliberately derailing the investigation. In Mindhunter, Jim relays information about the pedophiles and photos of children to Holden and Tench, believing that these pieces of evidence may have been tampered with, according to an APD recruit. After Jim introduces another wrongdoing committed by APD, the camera shifts to a cluster of APD officers on a balcony, an effective technique employed by the cinematographer to point the blame through the camera shift towards the officers.
We've been working with this task force for months. Somebody from APD knew we should have been looking at these guys all along.
This camera technique functions to direct the viewer's perspective from a morally sound institution, the FBI, that adamantly tries to solve the case, to a shady crime organization that obstructs the case. This appeals to the sense of iconography that a villain lies in the midst of our civilization through the use of mise-en-scène, where the shift in camera angle is matched with the exact time Jim hints that something corrupt is happening, reminding us that a possible culprit is there from our previous experiences with crime and syndicate movies. The previously mentioned scene shows the viewer how APD neglected to interview and involve the African American community, which evolves into APD omitting and discarding documents from the evidence locker. This occurs on two levels, an organizational and an individual level. They break their codes of ethics as an organization and shatter their moral compass as individuals by mistreating the paperwork. This is a critical moment where the viewer is already aware of the harmful inactions of APD, but now they're exposed to the active measures APD took to obstruct justice, demonstrating how disgusting their intentions are. Already, APD has made their world of policing centered around paperwork, a sign of neglect by not conversing and investigating the African American community in person. But this neglect goes one step further and turns into ill intentions with the tampering of the paperwork, showing just how corrupt APD is. Within the foreground of this image, the viewer's attention is focused on a set of unidentifiable figures on a balcony that are only distinguishable by their uniform. By stripping away these figures' identity with a dark setting and poor lighting, yet also latching onto the identity of the organization they follow, this snippet expresses the nefarious connotations of darkness and ill intentions that law enforcement has shown. Furthermore, in the far reaches of the background, the viewer sees two dark figures within the police chief's office, as the figure on the right is presumed to be the police chief himself, but recognizing the chief's iconic boxy hair. Despite the poor lighting that barely illuminates the balcony, the police chief's office is fully lit, by being a dark figure surrounded with contrast lighting used to highlight him. This surrounding light extends on how the police chief often tries to push on optimism and dedication that try to brighten the situation. Where in conjunction, the chief optimistically attempts to direct the task force into actively searching and visiting abduction sites seeking information, and also criticizes Holden for not being committed to the case by forgetting the children's names. These are acts that serve to help paint him with favorable lighting and good moral character within the viewer's mind. This is then complemented with him in Tench often painting Holden as theory crazy by not wanting to pursue the possibility that the Ku Klux Klan may have murdered these children, as it serves as the most obvious organization to blame for what looks like a hate crime. Whereby portraying him as a dark figure surrounded by light, this aesthetic makes it clear for the viewer to expose the facade he has created in order to deflect attention away from his goals. As this is similar to the image with the black car, where the viewer is exposed to a dark, mysterious environment that lacks moral character and hides the intentions within the shadows, out of the public's eye, which all takes place in an institution that prides itself of protecting its community. Our focus then shifts to the case of Edward Hope Smith and Alfred Evans, both of whose bodies were found on the side of a dirt path beneath a bed of trees. The police report doesn't contain much detail because after they were tipped that the kids were African American and involved with drugs, they instantly grew negligent about thoroughly investigating their cases. Through Mindhunter, the FBI attempts to do the opposite by ensuring that enough attention to detail was given to this case by going to the extent of sending their own forensics team down to Atlanta to confirm more details, as opposed to using some rookie recruits from APD.
Guys, these remains are less than 100 yards from where Milton Harvey was dumped 13 months ago. He's returning to a scene. What's the press doing here? Get down there and set up a perimeter. This is now a crime scene.
Forensic show up yet?
We don't have a body retrieval unit. Recruits will collect any evidence. It's not Luby Jeter. Been out here too long.
But it could be one of the other three still missing.
Because of the negligence of these police officers, society has no option but to digest the written content of these police reports through the eyes of the officers and thus takes in the incoherent bias that consumes the policing world. Therefore, the only framework that society gets when looking at such cases is through the biased tunnel vision of the FBI, a realization exploited by Mindhunter.
And finally, with all of these cases, the most prominent recurring motif throughout the film is the common but misleading symbol of life, the tree. The top of the tree is lush and green, much like the north of the country filled with order and peace, but as we go lower, the tree becomes darker with roots, like kudzu running rampant, a reference to the south of the country filled with a dark, chaotic history. As the bodies that have the life taken away from them are absorbed into the ground, they take the dark history and racism that took their life deep into the ground with them. Like a repository of national repressions, the benighted area down there whose exposure to the light is unfailingly horrifying and thrilling. The last thing we are left wondering is not necessarily the details of the reports that were missing, but instead why policing corporations have historically engulfed themselves in the world of paperwork, without ever taking a step away from the microscope to examine the life from which the paper originated, the tree, and of course, the human condition.